Hello, welcome to my 10K Q&A video. I couldn't be bothered setting up my whole backdrop for this one, so welcome. Still wearing the same t-shirt though, because I don't own any other t-shirts. Just a quick heads up, there isn't going to be much going on visually in this video, so if you prefer, this might be a good one to just stick on in the background and listen to more like a podcast, but it's up to you. So I've got some mathematical questions, I've got some channel questions, I've got some personal questions. Should be fun. I've cast my eye over the questions, but I haven't really planned any of my answers in much detail, so I apologise in advance if any of my answers are very rambly. And if you submitted a question and I don't get to answer yours, I apologise for that as well. Anyway, enough apologies, let's get into it. Tetra is Better asks, will you do a video about surreal numbers and combinatorial game theory? So many people have asked whether I will do a video on surreal numbers. It's been unreal. I never planned to make a video about surreal numbers, but maybe I will. There seems to be such a high demand for it. So it's on my maybe list. I'm not going to commit to an answer of yes, because I feel like whenever a creator on the internet says yes, that they will definitely do something, then they get hounded about it until they finally realize that project. So I'm not going to say yes, I'm just going to for now say it's on my maybe list, along with about 30 other things. With surreal numbers, I know the gist of what they are and how they're constructed, but I'm not overly familiar with them if I'm totally honest. And I just wanted my first few videos to be just stuff that I knew off the top of my head and I didn't really need to do my own research. That's going to change from now on because I've got a lot of video ideas where, in order to adequately explain them, I will need to do a bit of research, but that's the whole idea really, because it helps me to pick out the topics and fill in the gaps of my own knowledge in order to make the videos, which is what it's all about. Carsonab, or Carson AB, asks, why did you start a YouTube channel? Well, for that sweet, sweet ad revenue. No, not really. Basically, it should be obvious by now, but I love mathematics. Like, unashamedly, unapologetically, more than anything else, capital L, love mathematics. You know, what a gift it is that we can enter this universe of pure harmony and precision that's not plagued by any of the inconsistencies that burden our day-to-day lives and all other pursuits. You know, it is just the best. So I got as far as I could with academia, with research. It might be something that I go back to one day, but I discovered during my PhD that I really enjoy and that I'm really good at teaching. And then I'm also, outside of mathematics, I'm a huge cinephile. Like, I love films, really love them, and I've always been interested in filmmaking. So YouTube seemed to be the natural way of combining my love of maths, my love of teaching, my love of filmmaking into one package, and it's been really fun so far. Also, most of the teaching I've done in the last few years, it's been in schools, so I've not really had that much opportunity to talk about the higher level mathematics, so making a YouTube channel was a good outlet for that. And not to sound too self-important, I do think there's real value in making freely available educational content. So this is something I'm really quite passionate about, because 10 years ago we made tuition fees in this country really expensive compared to what they were previously. And that's something I really fundamentally disagree with. I think university access to higher education should be the most accessible thing. You know, I think learning shouldn't have those barriers. And I said in my last video that, you know, my videos aren't a replacement for a formal education, but if I can do anything to kind of, you know, make people curious or to provide that kind of intuition, that background intuition that is required in order to study mathematics, then I consider it a success. BN901 asks, what is your opinion on negative bases, like 19 being that whole expression there? Cool. Why not? I can't really see why it would be useful, but as a pure mathematician, that's never really bothered me. MGA Silver asks, do you make your own props for the videos? Yes, and funnily enough, I'm quite bad at anything like arts and crafts related, so making the props is actually usually my least favourite part of the process. But there are a couple of reasons why I decided to make them so tactile and hands-on. And the first is because mathematics is like, it's among the most abstract things that we have, right? So it's all taking place in our head, and to take any of it outside of our heads and make it hands-on, I think that can be a real accessible way for a lot of people who struggle with the abstraction to make it concrete in their minds. You know, in the world of teaching, we have a phrase we use, which is the concrete pictorial abstract. And you start with the concrete and then you make it abstract as you go. So kind of leaning into that idea. But secondly, I really like how Grant made Manim available and free to access for people to make their own animations. But there are already quite a few maths channels which are animation based, and I thought in order to find my own voice and my own style, I really want to depart and not just be another animation based channel. I think if I used those sorts of resources, I'd just end up looking like a discount 3 blue 1 brown, and I really don't want that. So in order to find my own voice and my own style, I decided from the get-go I'm not going to use Manim. I'm going to try and make it my own thing. That's not to criticize anyone using Manim. I think you should use the best tools available to make your video the best it can be. But for me personally, I don't think I could have used someone else's tools in order to find my own voice. My Choice asks, do you plan to make videos about the axiom of choice or the continuum hypothesis? Not currently. So PBS Infinite Series, remember that channel? Maybe I'm showing my age here. They did a pretty good video about the consequences of choice, and I'm not really sure what I could add to the discussion. In general, I don't want to make videos on topics that I already consider to be covered ground. Unless I can find my own spin, my own style, my own approach to that topic. And there's a funny story here, actually. So I remember about 10 years ago, I had the idea I wanted to make a YouTube channel, and I just never got around to it, and I never had the confidence to do it. And it was about 18 months ago, I decided, right, I'm really going to start taking steps to make my channel happen. Shortly after I started taking those real steps, 3 Blue 1 Brown announced the Summer of Maths Exposition Challenge, and I was like, fine, perfect. This is the right time. This is my chance. You know, it's going to happen. And then it didn't. You know, I finished my script for What is a Number, you know, my first video, and then I just never made it. Summer of Maths Exposition went by, and then I think it was around Christmas time, Asaf Karagila with Numberphile released a video on What is a Number. And I remember seeing it in my YouTube feed, and I messaged my friend straight away thinking, what am I doing with my life? I've waited and waited to release this video, never got around to it, and then someone's beaten me to the punch. Luckily, while that was a very good video, it didn't go into as much detail or in as much context as I wanted to give in mine. Had they done that, I probably would never have made that video, which you might think is not a very sensible approach, but that's just how I feel. You know, I don't want to make videos that I feel have already been done. There are videos on topics. So there's one topic in particular that I want to go into, and there are already a couple of videos on this that already have like a few million views, but they approach the topic in a very different way to the approach that I'm going to take, so I still feel justified in making that. Sorry, all of this is to say, regarding the axiom of choice, I don't know what I could really add, so probably not, but maybe. Gesok asks, what was the last piece of media, movie, music, book, etc. you engaged with? Well, as I mentioned, I'm a cinephile, so it's very dangerous to get me started talking about films, because when you do, I will talk and talk and talk, so I'll try to keep it brief. What was the last film that I watched? Oh yeah, so a few weekends ago, I had a bit of an animated film marathon, because for whatever reason, there was a bunch of animated films that I hadn't seen in the cinema, so I just wanted to catch up with them, and I watched them all in one weekend. They were Luca, which I thought was mediocre, Lightyear, which was also mediocre, Turning Red, which was quite good, Encanto, which I thought was really good, great characters, great story, and some great musical numbers, and the other one was Mitchell's versus the Machines, which I thought was excellent. Really, really enjoyed it. And I love that Sony Animation are really leaning into a lot more kind of graphic, more stylized animation. My biggest criticism of Pixar has always been that while their animation is very good, high quality, and it always looks very pretty, they don't have that much style in their animation. They have a very safe style, and I love the fact that in animation you can really you can go really full-blooded and make something so unique. Look at what Leica have done with, Kubo and the Two Strings and Coraline, two excellent films, and they just have this visual punch that immediately screams that studio. And Pixar has that to some extent, but, look back at, like Aardman Studios, the Wallace and Gromit and the Chicken Run and things like that. So good, such a striking style that you can recognize from a mile away. I just love that kind of stuff, and Pixar, in Soul, for example, they had some sequences in there that I thought were a little bit more experimental, and I love that film. Soul, by the way, is incredible. One of my favorite Pixar releases, though WALL-E is still the best one. And Listen to Me Talk. Didn't I warn you that film is one of those topics I will just ramble and ramble and ramble about, and I apologize. So let's move on. So music, I'm into a whole bunch of like prog metal, so Dream Theater, Opeth. I've been listening to more Haken, Tesseract, that sort of thing recently. I like some electronic stuff, but lately I've been listening to a lot of Snarky Puppy. They're like a jazz fusion supergroup, because I'm seeing them live soon, which should be awesome. And book, I've been reading The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch, which is the third part in his series. It's called the Gentleman Bastards series. And it's, how to describe it? It's kind of like Ocean's 11 meets Game of Thrones. So it's like about this bunch of con artists who, they do these long cons where they try to trick, like heist people out of their money. But it's set in a fantasy world, so it's got a bit of magic and a bit of like medieval type stuff. So really cool, really funny, quite witty, entertaining, and there's a great friendship at the heart of the stories, which I absolutely adore, and it just makes them so nice to read. Really good, really enjoying it so far. Gasok also asks, what's the story of the bricks? They seem very specific. Yeah, so I just thought it would be funny to have like the foundation of mathematics be like this actual brick foundation, and they seem to have gone down a storm with viewers. And the story behind them, my stepdad was basically laying a path in the back garden of my parents' house. I asked if I could borrow some of the bricks, and he was like, yeah, that's fine. And I was like, well, are you sure? Because I am going to write on them. And he was like, yeah, fine, because when I come to lay them in the path, I can just put them face down. So one day those bricks will be used as part of a path, and I always like to think, 200 years into the future when someone's digging that path and they turn these bricks over and it's like, oh, the axiom of pairing. Why is this written on here? Gasok's last question, how do you pronounce Gödel? Well, I pronounce Gödel as Gödel because I think the O with an umlaut makes an sound. I really do try to get names correct because I want to break from the British tradition of, getting everything wrong. Curiously, I do hear most people say Gödel as Gödel. So this is Kurt Gödel, by the way, of Gödel's incompleteness theorems. But I don't hear as much consistency with Möbius. I think most people would say that Mobius. So that's interesting. Illegal Ant on Shoe, great name, asks, what is your favourite math theorem? Be it because of its usefulness, a funny name, a proof, or whatnot. I mean, how are you supposed to choose just one? I actually have no idea how to answer this. And that's interesting in and of itself, because I'm usually one of those people, I'm obsessed with classification and ranking and categorizing. I'm always the person who has a favorite thing. And, my terrible attempts at small talk are often, oh, what is your favorite film or something like that? And then people are like, oh, I don't have a favorite one, I just like these ones. And I'm like, no, you must have a favorite. Like, I've got a favorite book, I've got a favorite band, I've got a favorite film. But yeah, favorite theorem. I've never really thought about that. That's a really good point. So I will say two theorems kind of sprang to mind immediately, and they probably don't qualify as my favorite, but there's good stories behind them. So one is Cauchy's residue theorem. So this is a result in complex analysis that basically it gives you a quick way of calculating path integrals of complex valued functions, and the way to compute those integrals is basically to look at the way the function wraps around or winds, the winding number around the points at which the function is undefined, something like that. And my research interests are very far away from complex analysis, so it's a bit of a weird choice, but I just like the story because It was this sleepy Friday afternoon, this lecture that we had to go to, complex analysis. We all wanted to just go to the pub, but the lecturer, the lectures had been building up to the residue theorem, and the way he started the lecture was, he said something on the lines of, "This result is one of the most surprising things you'll ever see on a Friday afternoon." And it just stuck with me because it was, it's an amazing theorem and it's got a really good proof. So yeah, the other one that sprang to mind was Lagrange's theorem in group theory. So this is a pretty rudimentary, elementary group theory result. Pretty basic. If you took a course on group theory, you'd be doing Lagrange's theorem within the first few lectures. So it's pretty basic, but the reason it came to mind is because, I ended up doing a PhD in group theory, and I remember first learning group theory, and I was enjoying it because, I like to poke around these abstract structures like the next algebraist. But I was enjoying it, but it was that moment when this Lagrange's theorem popped out. And if you don't know Lagrange's theorem, if you have a group G and a subgroup H, then the size of H has to divide the size of G. So if G has 24 elements, then a subgroup of it has to have 8 or 12 or 4 elements. It can't have 9 or 5 elements. It needs to be a factor of 24. And it was just this moment where it just seems too good to be true. What right do groups have to nest inside each other so perfectly, so symmetrically? And groups just have this quality where they just fold inside each other in such a nice and elegant and pure... it's just the best. So my group theory journey started when I first saw Lagrange's theorem. So it has a special place for me, even if it is a rather basic result. I mean, thinking about it, now that I'm talking about groups, if it can be called a single theorem, then surely the classification of finite simple groups has to go down as my favorite theorem, because group theory wouldn't be the subject it is today without it. It's extraordinary, the work that was done to actually classify it. The fact that we can do it is, I think, pretty extraordinary. And there are other results, so like the isomorphism theorems, they're magic, and the Selov theorems, incredibly powerful, that I used all the time in my research. But there's something magic. There was a magical moment for me when I first did Lagrange's theorem, so I'll go with that one. Boincus Maximus, fantastic name, asks, what is your opinion on computer-assisted proofs, like the four-color theorem? What, if any, value do you think they offer to mathematics? This is a great question. So I remember a few years ago, I remember James Grime discussing this, and I remember him saying something along the lines of, computer-assisted proofs are in some way inferior to a good proof because they don't provide any reason why the statement is true, and a good proof should provide insight into the reasons why the theorem is what it is. And I agree with that. My go-to example is the fundamental theorem of arithmetic. So every integer can be written as uniquely as a product of primes, up to permutation. But, by going through the proof of that, you see it has to be that way. It couldn't be any other way. You see the underlying structure and you see things the way they really are, and a good proof really does do that. But I do depart from Grime in a couple of ways. The first might be a little bit controversial, and that is to say, maybe some things are just the way they are and there isn't a reason for them anyway. So, I don't know, like 19, that's a prime number. Why is it prime? It just is. And you can say, well, yeah, it doesn't have any factors, but why 19? Why this point in the list of odd numbers do we have a prime? And, seeking answers to those kind of questions, you might be assuming a reason where there might not be one. To pick an example outside of maths, why do protons and electrons have opposite charge, equal but opposite charge? They just do. You can talk about the quarks and how they build up the proton and everything like that, but why do they have certain charges? The assignment of positive and negative is arbitrary, as far as I know, but they do have equal and opposite charge, and there might not be a reason for that. That's just the way particles are. That's the way it is. So I think some statements in mathematics can be read that way, and I don't think that makes them any less beautiful. You know, I think there's beauty in seeing things for how they really are. The second way I depart from Grime here is that mathematics, above all else, for me, is the pursuit of truth. And there might be some things that we are not ready to prove the elegant way, but if we can prove it in a sloppy, computer-assisted way, and it allows us to determine truth before we find the elegant way, then more power to us. And sometimes the knowledge that a statement is true is what allows us to find, you know, the structural, the elegant, the proof from the book, as Erdős would say. But as I said before, I think sometimes things might just be the way they are. You know, every planar graph is four-colorable. It might just be that's how it is. You know, there is no why. And to ask why is assuming a reason where there isn't one. I do hope I'm not misrepresenting James Grimes' views here. I owe him a huge thank you, actually, because he tweeted my original video shortly after I posted it, and I think he was partly responsible for the amount of traffic that I got to that video. So if you're watching this, James, a huge thank you to you. And if I am misrepresenting you, please correct me, because I'm not like really challenging what you're saying. I think I've just got a slightly different take on it. I should say that I am a little bit biased in my answer to that question. I kind of have to have that view on computer-assisted proofs having value because Non1 asks, what's your PhD thesis? Here is my PhD thesis on certain subgroups of E8 of 2. So it was group theory, finite groups. So basically E8 of 2 is this massive, huge, stinking great finite group. It's massive. It's got about 10 to the power 74 elements. That's more elements than it's estimated there are atoms in the Milky Way galaxy. So it's a pretty big guy. My research group were basically attempting to find all the maximal subgroups of E8 of 2. So those are the subgroups that aren't nested inside a larger proper subgroup of E8 of 2. Previous work had been done to say if H is a maximal subgroup of E8 of 2, then it has one of a whole bunch of shapes. And we were basically going down this list and knocking out, you know, either confirming that they are maximal or disproving that they are maximal. My thesis was basically my contribution to this effort, so it was like 8 of these shapes I said I kind of chose and then confirmed whether or not they were maximal. And if they are maximal, constructing them within E8 of 2. So it was computer assisted. We had to do a lot of pen and paper research because 10 to the power 74, it's so big that you can't just sift through the elements kind of in a brute force way because, you know, that number is very big. And even with all of the computing power in the world running for the age of the universe, you're not even going to scratch the surface of checking, you know, and finding all of the elements that you require. So it was a bit of pen and paper research to find, okay, if H is a maximal subgroup of this type, it's constructible within this set, which is small enough that we can then sieve. So it was a sieving process, but it required a bit of pen and paper research to actually construct the thing that we eventually sieved, if that makes sense. So it was really fun. It was really hard. You know, research in general is very hard, and you know, I struggled with it, to be honest. I heavily relied on the people that I worked with and owe them a huge debt. But yeah, it was really fun. When you are making progress, it is the best feeling in the world, and I do miss it. Swearesnim asks, what is your favourite definition of a graph? Either a plot of a function, an adjacency matrix, a set of nodes and a set of edges. Well, strictly speaking, a graph is a set of ordered pairs, you know, x comma f of x, and the plot is a visual representation of the graph. But I take your point. I like the graph theory kind of graph. I like them a lot. I think if I hadn't done a PhD in group theory, I probably would have done one in graph theory instead. I also really liked topology, but topology is really hard. The Aura Charmander asks, what are your plans for the channel now that you finished defining all numbers? More maths. I want to make some videos that are, you know, less than 40 minutes long. I have some big plans for like multi-video series. So like I've got a few series ideas that I want to make, but I want to get more experience making videos before I attempt to make those. So for the time being, more mathsy videos. I'm hopefully going to make some in the 10 to 20 minute mark. Some history based, some based around famous mathematicians and those sorts of things. So it'll be a kind of a wider range of topics going forward, but still very mathematical. Slice Illustrious 6326 asks, this might sound generic, but what are your favourite numbers? Yeah, so my cliche answer to this question is like the golden ratio, just because it's pure magic. But also, the one that I share with the kids that I teach is always 216, because it's 6 cubed, but it's also 3 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 5 cubed, which is immensely satisfying in and of itself. But it's also a good gateway to discuss things like, you can have two squares that add up to another squared. 3 squared plus 4 squared is 5 squared, in the Pythagorean triples. But you can't have two cubes that add up to another cube. Fermat's last theorem demonstrates that. But you can have 3 cubes that add up to another cube. And I find it's a good springboard, a good jumping off point to talk about conjectures and theorems and what kind of problems mathematicians actually solve. Undecided Yet asks, what's your take on the question, is math invented or discovered? Yeah, this is always a fun question. I reckon my views might not be entirely popular here, but I'll give them anyway. I'll tell you what I'm not, and that is a Platonist. I think the idea that these mathematical objects and statements and structures actually exist out there for us to discover, I don't think that's right. I lean closer, probably somewhere between fictionalism and deductivism. So I think I don't care whether mathematics is true absolutely. I only care that it's true in its own framework. I think the axioms in the initial assumptions are inventions, but it is true that the consequences of those axioms often feels like discovery. To me, it's like asking whether chess is an invention or a discovery. I think we would all agree that chess is a human invention. It's not a discovery. I think if we reboot the universe and humans never happened, then it's likely that chess wouldn't happen either. So it does feel like an invention. However, once you've got the rules of chess, which we've just invented, then there is a sense in which you discover things about it, like what is the optimal opening move. So let's say, for example, pawn e4 is the optimal opening move. There is a sense in which that was discovered. The optimal move is baked into the rules. It's a consequence of the rules. But is it true that that move was invented and then demonstrated to be the best? Or is it more the case that optimal move exists and we've discovered it? The latter case feels more like what it's like to do mathematics. Now, I would say this about, I'm a group theorist, so there are 3 axioms that define a group, 4 if you count closure, which I don't. I think that's baked into what a binary operation actually is. But anyway, let's call it 3. There's 3 axioms that define a group, and that is an invention. We've just kind of created that. We've invented the idea of a group. And yes, it's true that the definition was motivated by what we find in physical reality, but I don't care. The abstract notion of a group is an invention, for me, anyway. However, the consequences of those axioms leads us down to discover things like, the monster group is the largest sporadic simple group, and that feels like a discovery. It was baked into those axioms. Those axioms produce a theory which we can then learn about. It doesn't feel like we're inventing our way through it. It feels like discovery. And especially my PhD, this E8 of 2 thing exists. Its maximal subgroups are in there, and we just have to discover what they are. So that's, I think, where I come down. I think the initial assumptions are an invention, but the consequences feel like discovery. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you especially to those who have subscribed and helped me get to this 10K milestone. And thank you especially to my Patreon supporters for your continued support. I really, really appreciate it. Sorry if I didn't get to your question. Thanks to all those who submitted questions. I've got to wrap up the video somewhere because as fun as it is to talk about myself, I can't sit here and do it all day. I don't think anyone would thank me for that. I guess this has not been another proof under another roof, but thanks for watching anyway, and I'll see you in the next one.